throes of budget season with multiple public meetings. It's always an exciting time, though. Here's Fred. I think we have 4 members of the CBAC. Hopefully, we will get a fifth and an official quorum. But it is probably appropriate to go ahead and get started with the 2 major items that are on the agenda. So you can run this agenda, or if you would prefer, I can jump. There are 2 items on the agenda today. The first is I'm going to try and do a shortened, truncated summary of the FY26 budget for the CBAC. And then for anyone who happens to stumble upon this on YouTube or the city's webpage, encourage you to go back and watch. There have been 2 budget workshops, as well as the manager proposed the budget last week. And so there is a cumulative probably 3 or 4 hours worth of budget presentation where you can see a lot of the weeds and details. But my attempt this morning is going to be to take that 3+ hours and condense it down into about 20 minutes for you. So I do have, there's about 35 slides, but I'm going to rifle through some of them really quickly. Would encourage you stop and ask questions wherever you have them. But every year the CBAC looks at the manager's proposed budget. Many of the things that we've already talked about, you're going to see directly in these. The intent here, though, is to give you that overview. And then as part of the second agenda item, we'll be looking at the recommendations that we edited 2 weeks ago. And if you have additional recommendations that you want to add specifically about something you see in the budget presentation or the 26 budget, it is always within your purview to do that. So I am going to attempt to share this. And Janice, I'm going to ask you to make sure that it is sharing correctly as I do this. This in presentation. Is everyone seeing the presentation?
Mhm.
And is it cycling?
You have it pulled up on not full screen. So
Okay, it is, okay, it's on screen too. Oh, give me 1 second, I'll adjust that. Let's try that again. Is it on full screen and cycling now?
it's full screen. It's not cycling, but if you click, are you cycling it right now? Now it
Yes.
is.
No.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry for the technical difficulty there. But again, the intent here is to give a very quick overview of really the high level policy issues in the FY26 budget. Do want to note, as part of the budget process, the City Council is adopting their new strategic plan. It will be in the budget package on June 16th. They had a retreat in January and saw a draft version of the plan in April. It does include four new focus areas. So for the first time in quite a while, the city's got four new focus areas. Good government, being good government principles, financial stability, and focusing on core services. Economic prosperity, both for individuals and for businesses. Community advocacy and engagement is an area that talks about working with stakeholders in the community, as well as our elected officials at the state, federal level, county, and school board. And then the livable community areas is really about a sense of public safety and creating a community that has the assets and amenities that makes us a community of choice for the folks who live here and visit here. So I would encourage you to look at that document. It is included in the budget document itself, and there are videos out there of the presentations of the strategic plan from last month as well. One of the things I wanted to touch on, we've talked about this in multiple CBAC meetings, but again, there's a lot of economic uncertainty and a lot of political uncertainty, both at the federal level. And then if you watched some of the presentations, most recently at the state level, the Senate version of the budget bill eliminated Powell bill funding for the state, which was roughly $9 million worth of funding that's used for city street resurfacing and streets maintenance. It is my understanding that the House version of the bill at the state level has reinstated uh, all or at least a good portion of that funding. But what I would tell you is we don't know what's going to come from the state budget until they get into conference and it gets passed out of conference committee and comes back to the floor. So there are a lot of things, just both economically and in terms of statutes, that we're looking at both at the federal and state levels.
Hey,
Uh,
Scott, what's the
yes, sir.
timeline for that?
The timeline for the state budget.
Yeah.
If you were to ask a state legislator, they would always tell you the timeline for that is to get it approved before July 4th weekend.
Yeah, let's be
Uh,
more realistic.
I don't know that they have ever actually made that goal. The 1 year I worked there, I was there until late August. I would tell you it just depends on what other policy issues that they're working on, but generally speaking, it's usually well into July or potentially into August before you know. So from a state law perspective, we have to pass our budget by June 30th. Technically, the state is supposed to do that too, but they do continuing resolutions or interim budgets to keep it going. So we will pass a budget, and then if they significantly affect any of our intergovernmental resources, we'll have to implement some strategies post-budget adoption to meet whatever those needs are.
Thank you.
Yep. So at a high level, Pat's budget as proposed, and it's now in City Council's arena, does four things. The first thing is continuing to invest in our employees by trying to adequately compensate employees. So I've got a slide here showing what's in the manager's proposed budget for pay and what that looks like in some of our neighboring jurisdictions. This budget is really about maintaining service levels. There are no significant enhancements in any department, but neither are there really any cuts to service in any department. So we are really trying to focus on continuing to provide the core services that we provide day in and day out. Strengthening financial position. We have talked about this. This was basically your CBAC work plan this year. There are several things related to debt that we'll talk about again, but that speaks to some of your recommendations and trying to lighten the debt profile of the city and put us in a better place with respect to how much we're spending in interest. And then from a capital perspective, if you watched the last Thursday's presentation on the capital plan, there's a lot of discussion about the focus on, there have been projects that have been budgeted, trying to finish a lot of those budgeted projects because we don't have the capacity, staff capacity, if we were to add millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of new projects, both to get to the ones that are already budgeted plus new ones. So those are kind of the high level budget priorities for fiscal year 26. Again, I'm just going to talk about these kind of in passing and go through, but we do have a 6% combined merit and COLA. We do have some increases from the state. Those continue to come every year. As you can see, they are between 75 and almost 100 basis points, which is a 5 or 6% increase in retirement costs for us. We talked about there not being any specific service level reductions or real enhancements, but we will stop and talk about transit when we get to the slides on transit. And wanted to note for CBAC, although we'll talk about that cash transition for vehicles and equipment, we are getting closer to getting on a replacement schedule. So those of you that have been on CBAC for 3 or 4 years have heard me say, we've been behind, we've been behind. We are getting much closer. And as we are transitioning to cash, we are hopefully not going to have to put quite as much increase in the budget each year to stay on the replacement schedule for sanitation trucks, fire trucks, those types of things. Again, your work plan was talking about the reducing reliance on debt for operations. So both of those things that we have discussed at great length are in the city manager's budget proposal. So the first one is the elimination of that internal leasing program and using $50 million in cash to pay off $50 million worth of debt. It's both current debt and kind of a debt deferral. If we didn't use that money, we would have to issue another $25 million in debt. So if you watched, again, one of those budget workshops, that $50 million from the in cash from the debt service fund is paying off all of the existing debt and then also keeping us from having to issue future debt for things that we are currently purchasing and would purchase in the future. As we talked about, that second bullet point, reducing debt for maintenance activities, that's the 2/3 bonds that we talked about at length for street resurfacing, and all kinds of maintenance activities. The proposed budget does have a part of the property tax rate above revenue neutral recommended to provide cash for things that it really doesn't make sense to do on those 20-year financing terms. And then in terms of completing already funded projects, again, the idea there is quite a bit that council has appropriated over the last 10 years, but even in the last 4 or 5 years, things like the RAISE project, RAISE grant for a Long Branch Trail is an $8 million greenway and sidewalk project. You do have the multi-use path east and west. There are multiple bridge projects that are out there. So we have a lot of large infrastructure projects that are in design and going into construction. And so the focus is going to be to get a lot of those large infrastructure projects out of the way before adding a whole bunch more to the plate. I'm going to breeze through. I've got 4 or 5 slides here on revaluation. Again, your work plan talked a lot about revaluation. So at a very high level, again, there was a 51% increase in real property across the city, 40% in the total tax base. And then we're going to talk here a little bit about the difference between residential, commercial, and industrial growth again with some of what was shown to city council. So again, here's that total tax base. You can see on there, the 26 revaluation is far and away larger than anything we've seen in recent history. And it's actually 3 times larger than the largest reval from a percentage basis we've seen in the last 3 decades. 13% growth was the highest we had seen, and this is at 40% growth. So really, we've not seen anything like this in Forsyth County in a long, long time. CBAC, again, I stole this from CBAC to give to council. So I appreciate you letting me do that for y'all earlier in the year, but this is just the revenue neutral calculation with the final numbers that we got from the tax office. The revenue neutral rate ended up being 52.66 cents, what you see down there in step 5, which is right at a 20-cent reduction from the current tax rate. And we're going to talk about the manager's proposal is 4.8 cents above revenue neutral. And we're going to talk about what that specifically goes to. We have had 2 public budget meetings. Last night was one of them at Little Creek Rec Center, and then the Tuesday before at Carl Russell. What we have tried to do with reval is show people, particularly home something very similar to this. I don't know if you saw this exact graphic, but what you see there is someone whose home went up 20% would have a drop in their property tax bill. Someone who went up 50% would have an increase, and those who go up 80% or more would have a pretty significant increase in their tax bills. Again, a lot of that is related to the revaluation, but some of it is being above that revenue neutral number. I can stop here and answer any questions, but I think there's a little more revealing slide coming on the next two. So we showed this to city council. The pie chart on the left is the tax base by type from the current fiscal year that we're in. And the pie chart on the right is the tax base for fiscal year 26 for the proposed budget. What you can see there is basically a tax burden shift from commercial and industrial real property to residential real property. What makes up the tax base is the residential component of it grew at a higher rate than commercial and industrial, and that means a shift in terms of who pays tax bills in aggregate. What that looks like, and I'm going to stop here and explain this one because CBAC has not seen this level of data this way before. On the left, you see there's a dark blue and then kind of a teal or light blue bar. That dark blue bar is with the proposed tax rate. The average or median residential household would see a 27% increase in taxes, city taxes. The teal bar is even if we went to the revenue neutral number, the average residential house would still see a 17% increase because of that tax burden shift from commercial and industrial to residential. So under the proposed budget, the average resident pays a 27% higher tax bill. The average commercial property pays a 7% higher tax bill. And the average industrial property tax bill actually goes up, that's rounded up, less than 1%. Again, that's because housing growth value was higher than land and building growth in those other categories. The teal, again, being revenue neutral. If city council were to adopt a revenue neutral tax rate, where the average resident would see a 17% increase in their tax bill, the average industrial property would have seen an 8% decrease in their tax bill. So there are a lot of people who own homes who are going to be saying, my taxes are going up. Part of that is not because we're above revenue neutral. The larger majority of it is because of the way the tax base has shifted. So did want to provide you that information. And again, happy to answer any questions there. We have told everyone, yeah, Fred.
Is there any big obvious like industrial park or anything that just went out of business or did horribly? Or is it just an overall thing?
So we are, the city manager has asked us to kind of go back and look at that. It's maybe something that we bring back to city council. I haven't had any conversations with the county tax director where he said, this property, what you've heard a lot. Property
Scott,
growth, I
you
don't
faded
know
out there.
exactly.
You faded out
sorry.
for like a minute.
I faded out.
Yeah,
looks like there.
You
Oh,
froze
sorry
for
about
just
that.
a second.
What I was going to say is from speaking with the county tax director, I don't know of any specific properties. I think we're going to try and go back and see kind of what that growth looks like. What we've heard is post-COVID, there's a lot of vacancy in commercial properties, and so that's affected commercial property value. From the industrial perspective, I don't know if that's just because we don't have as much industrial property to grow as we have in the past, or whether maybe the way that those are valued, they have not increased significantly. But more information potentially to come on that. That's a great question, Fred, one the city manager has asked, but we don't have the data for right now. Just showing property tax rates. Again, the property tax rate is actually going to drop 15 cents from what it was last year in the proposed budget. But as you see over there on the side, 4.8 cents above that revenue neutral calculation. I'm going to call it 1.3 cents for general operations. So that's basically employee pay and inflation. Keeping up with vehicle replacement. 1.3 cents is for that those previously funded debt projects that we used with 2/3 bonds. So the city manager has proposed increasing the tax rate to cash fund all of that maintenance and maintaining the capacity in the debt service fund so that we can replace buildings at a faster rate in the future. That would include things like rec centers, fire stations, city yard buildings, those kinds of things. And then the largest component of the effective tax rate increase is for transit. And I've got a slide at the end to talk about transit. But generally speaking, we have been telling the city council that the transit fund was going to become insolvent several years down the road. We kept keeping the fund afloat with federal money from CARES and ARPA. We have now spent down all of the fund balance, or will have by the end of this fiscal year. And so that 2.2 cents is not the budget to budget change in the transit fund, but that is the, as we've called it a couple of times in CBAC, the fiscal cliff that we know has been coming. So the vast majority of that increase is the operations have become more expensive over time, and we have been reliant on one-time sources that we no longer have. Total budget summary, the city's total proposed budget, just under $728 million. There's a lot of ups and downs here, but this is kind of the slide that's intended to at a summary level, explain some of those large changes. So again, the total budget changes almost $70 million year to year. That first line is the net change in the equipment leasing fund. Again, there's that $50 million coming in. It's shown here as a net of 26 because there was a balloon payment in fiscal year 25, but that's using that $50 million to pay off all that existing leasing debt. Total compensation, so the 6% merit and COLA along with retirement changes is about $13 million. The water and sewer system is up as they switch to AMI. They have inflation and have additional principal and interest payments for revenue bonds that they're going to issue for wastewater systems and water distribution. Did want to note there is a massive accounting change at the convention center per what the external auditors are requesting, or how they're requesting that we account for the convention center. It does not change the operations at all. It does not change in any way, shape, form, or fashion basically the amount that the convention center is costing the city. That $7.2 million, if you were to flip to that page, is just reflective of, we have a vendor running the convention center, and it loses a few $100,000 a year. We would normally budget the few $100,000 that it loses. The auditors are now telling us we actually have to budget all of the revenue and expenses that the vendor has and show them on our books. So it is overall, it shows as an expense increase to the budget, but it's really just a debit and credit accounting change for that operation. So again, debt service fund, principal and interest payments. So there are some general government lobs that are being issued that are causing principal and interest payments to increase. Those are things that were already approved. It's not new debt from the perspective of council authorizing it. It's been authorized in previous years. We're just now getting to the issuance of it. We are replacing the human resources information system. I think it's 24 or 25 years old, something like that, and is kind of on its last leg and no longer going to be supported by the vendor that we have in about a year. And again, transit system, we'll talk about the transit system. So $2.9 million, about half of that is the operations and about half is capital, but 80% of the capital piece is covered by federal funds. So those are the really kind of high level changes. There's a lot of little minutia that happens, but those are some of the major changes when someone asks, why is the budget up? The budget is really up because we're paying off old debt, because we're increasing compensation, because of principal and interest payments, and because of an accounting change in a couple of different enterprise funds. Again, this is our way. There's not a lot of new things. We don't have new departments, new services that we're rolling out as part of this budget. For residents, just a few slides here in terms of what are the taxes and fee changes, or major taxes and fee changes look like. So we just went through those first three bullet points about being 4.8 cents above revenue neutral. There is an average 5% water and sewer increase that the Utilities Commission sets that will be effective in July. Stormwater rate increase of 4% effective in January. So the last 2 years we've done 8%. We have pulled that back down to 4% based on capital spending at the current rate. I will say there's probably a need several years down the road to look at how quickly we're spending capital in stormwater and whether they're going to need new revenue bonds or not. But in the current version of our long range projection, we do have moderated growth in the rates for stormwater. And then a couple of recreation fees. Again, if you saw me talk to city council, we do have a lot of recreation fees that haven't been changed in 10 or 20 years. And so there are recommended fee increases for aquatics, for recreation center rentals, slight increases at Winston Lake Golf Course, and then a few other things like renting our mobile stages, showmobiles, those types of things. But again, many of those haven't changed in a very long time. So our recreation department did some comparisons of Greensboro, Raleigh, Durham, Fayetteville, Cary, some of those other cities, looked at what they're charging and what we're charging, and made some recommendations to get us to a higher level of cost recovery. That too is actually part of one of the recommendations that CBAC has with looking at diversifying the revenue stream, not solely relying on the property tax. So that is one of those attempts for the places that we have services where we have user fees. We've done some increases there, and then we do need to come back on the back end and make sure that we're looking at overall policy goals related to revenue for those areas that have user fees. So the next two slides, we'll talk about what does that mean for the average user. We do this every year. Again, you'll see that property tax line like we showed, nearly 27% city property tax increase for the average residential property. Again, that 5% average for water and sewer works out to just over 5%, or 5.3 for water and sewer charges. Stormwater fees at 4% are actually end up being $2 a year increase, and the motor vehicle privilege tax doesn't change, which gives you an overall just over 17.5% increase for the average residential customer, or about $27 a month. That is not insignificant for folks. We have heard that in our public meetings. And again, this is what the city manager has proposed without cutting any services in any way. It is interesting to see that. And then we have the chart that we always show for kind of that average residential taxes and fees combined for our peer jurisdictions. As you can see there, and I will note, if you look at the footnote there, at the time we produced this, and we're going to be updating it, that Winston-Salem bar is with our new taxes and fees, and the other ones are with last year's taxes and fees. So not adjusting the prior years for those other cities, total taxes and fees still less in Winston-Salem than in some of those other areas, particularly as we look to Greensboro, who basically has the same housing market and income that we do. We are still significantly less than them in terms of $200 a year without having adjusted for what they might do. In some of those other areas, Raleigh, Durham, and Charlotte, the incomes are higher. So kind of the effective increase or effective position is a little different. But this is something that we have shown to City Council and shown to the public of, even if you have this large tax increase, we're still kind of in a position where your taxes and fees, what you pay for government services, are less than our close neighbor. So that's one of the things that you've probably heard the city manager say, and you may hear City Council talk about as well.
Scott, do we
Yes.
have any sort of, any insight into where these other cities are either increasing or decreasing relative to our industrial and commercial increases and decreases, or is that kind of getting out a little ahead of ourselves?
So I'm going to answer that three ways. I'm going to do it in reverse. So in terms of the kind of the difference in the tax base, Durham is the only other city going through a reval this year with us. So the others are not revaling. I think Greensboro is next year, Raleigh maybe next year, and Charlotte maybe next year too. But Durham is the only one going through a reval. We proposed a rate 9% above revenue neutral. They proposed a rate 12 or 13% above revenue neutral. I don't know what their comparison looks like. We would have to reach out to the Durham County Tax Office to get that. I will say for Charlotte, Greensboro, and Raleigh, they're all going to have water and sewer increases. Greensboro, Charlotte, and Raleigh are not going to have city property tax increases this year. It is interesting to look at who changes their tax rates in what years. Greensboro had reval 3 years ago, did an effective 9-cent increase, and then 4 cents the year after it. So they increased the tax rate effectively 13 cents in 2 years, but have gone flat 2 years in a row. I would expect to see them as part of reval next year have a effective tax rate increase. Again, that's just talking with staff in these other areas. But at least for Raleigh, Greensboro, and Charlotte, they are not proposing a tax rate increase this year. These are those user fees and recreation. Wanted to show just a couple examples of those. So again, if you watched the presentation to City Council, there's a pool fee increase. It's been 25 years since we've done aquatics fees increases. You can see there for after school and day camps for childcare. Again, they haven't been adjusted since 2008. My note there that I told the City Council is I actually have a 7-year-old who uses these services. And so when you look at after school monthly fees, jumping from $100 to $140, that seems very significant. The YMCA that my child uses, the fee for that, if you are a non-member, is over $300 a month. And the fee for a member is $265 a month with a $100 membership. So we are still charging half of what a nonprofit is charging to provide those services. So by all means, still the lowest cost provider. And then you can see there, again, just an example of one of the room rentals in a rec center going up, as well as the golf course, $2 a round. In terms of the 6% overall combined merit and COLA, this is what we show the City Council. So every year, the Association of County Commissioners, in concert with the North Carolina League of Municipalities, does a statewide survey that they send to managers and budget and finance staff of what are you projecting. So at that time, in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, the average combined merit and COLA, again, about 5.8%, total across the state about 5.5%. They did get a very good response rate. So when the proposed budget included a 6%, it was based on 40% of the cities and counties in the Piedmont region, showing that they were having roughly a 5.5 to 6% increase. I'm going to kind of go through the general fund slides pretty quickly. If you have questions, let me know. Generally speaking, the general fund budget is up about 5.5% year to year. We talked a lot about revenue projection. We talked a lot about expenditures and base budget in our, I think it was February meeting. But again, property taxes are up because of 2.6 cents above revenue neutral, as well as just a little bit of annualized growth going to both operations in the general fund. And then of that 2.6, again, 1.3 is for kind of the capital maintenance. From an accounting perspective, those revenues come into the general fund and then we transfer them to the capital fund for those maintenance activities. We talked about the electricity sales tax growth that's in that utility sales tax being the major contributor to that multi-million-dollar growth in utility sales tax. Again, relatively small growth in local option sales tax. You guys have seen all these charts before, but we are projecting 1% retail sales growth distributions back to us. But that 2.7 million, as a council member pointed out, is more than 1% revenue growth. The way sales taxes are distributed when they come back to the county, because we increased our tax levy last year, there's an ad valorem distribution. So we're projecting 1% sales growth essentially, and we're getting more in the range of kind of the 3% total revenue growth just based on the distribution methodology. I did want to show on their recreation fees, even though we're increasing 60 or 70 recreation fees that haven't been done in a long time, it's actually a very small part of the general fund budget. So about $300,000 out of 300 million. And then the note on the opioid settlement fund, as that partially funds our bear team in the fire department, that funding source went down by $400,000 as being covered just by general purpose revenues. Not going to go into a whole lot of details here. Just wanted to show you overall personnel growth is about 6%. We had about a 6% or combined 6% step in merit. There are a few position changes. We actually are doing a pretty major reorganization of the engineering department. They have reduced a couple of positions, but then reclassified several others. So they do have a net reduction in positions. And CBAC talked last year about some of the double slotted positions a little bit as we have this conversation. And so you see that last bullet point, our salary savings adjustment was increased. There were a couple of positions that had been on the city's books that we are now budgeting for that we hadn't in the past. And they're kind of spread out, a couple in human resources, fairgrounds, They're in a couple of different departments. The benefits change is what we wanted to highlight. Again, just in the general funds, almost $6 million worth of benefits changes, 2.3 million of that related mostly to the local government employees retirement system. Again, the state mandated increases for retirement. We do have some increases for healthcare, says, and dental. The vast majority of that is healthcare. Have had some increased workers' compensation claims, so had to increase the benefits factor for that just a little bit. FICA is always going to go up anytime you increase salaries. And then we do have a few other benefits, but they're kind of immaterial to the overall budget to budget change. Okay, so this one is very specifically, I want to stop here for CBAC and talk about this one. If you look in the budget book, when we say supplies and services, there's a lot of change in a lot of departments year to year. And the reason for that is because when we went or are going to cash equipment replacement, where we used to have principal and interest payments, everything that's going to be done by our fleet department now shows up as a supplies and services charge to the fleet department where the actual replacement will take place. So what I want to kind of do here is look at that top line, which is supplies and services kind of without those fleet changes. And you can see there is an increase. It's kind of in line with inflation. But those three lines together are the effect of all of this difference in equipment and vehicle replacement. So when you look at FY24, you see $17 million worth of principal and interest payments. And again, when you look at 25 in that line, zero. There are going to be no more internal leasing principal interest payments. But what you have, I'm trying to point at my screen here, but you can see the fleet replacement charge of 11.9. So that's what fleet is going to buy. And then 5.8 is what we're going to buy in cash directly in the departments. Those equal to $17.7 million, which is a $600,000 or roughly 3.5% increase year to year, which for the most part is just related to the cost of the vehicles that we're buying. So we paid off all the debt, we switched to cash, and from a holistic perspective, there is not a huge increase in equipment and vehicle replacement and acquisition in the budget. Again, if you look in the budget book, all of these four lines, well, the fleet replacement charge and supplies and services, these two will be coupled together. And so it is kind of difficult in the budget book to see that, but we wanted to separate it out for city council and then also directly related to the recommendations that you have to show you that. Again, the intent here is to show to city council, we've not added a lot to the budget in terms of new services. So you got just over $2 million in the general fund that are really inflation related, police contracts, mowing contracts. We've got a recycling area out on Ronaldo Avenue or Ronaldo Road that is in need of being renovated and upfitted, sanitation routing software, that eviction diversion program that we've been doing for several years. And you can see IT costs, Duke Energy rates, collection costs for county taxes and credit card fees. The vast majority of the increase, that 3.5% you saw there, there's no new services in it. It's really just keeping up with the level of business that we're currently doing. Did also want to hit on a few things just at a high level. A lot of times when taxes increase, people say, oh, you're just allowing things into the budget that shouldn't be there. There are $8 million worth of personnel requests and roughly $7 million worth of non-personnel operating requests that departments asked for that are not in this budget. Many of those are things that they would like to have to provide better services or think that they need. Would note affordable housing. We do have $5 million set aside in current funds for FY26, but after fiscal year 26, the vast majority of the affordable housing money that we have for that programming will be exhausted. So city council will have to make some decisions as part of the 27 budget. We've talked about street resurfacing a lot with CBAC over the course of many years. To get to a 30-year resurfacing cycle, which is where you'd like to be on average for all of your streets, both community streets as well as major thoroughfares, probably need to add $4 to $5 million a year, depending on what asphalt costs, to get to a better street resurfacing cycle. And then just a note there that there are community agencies popped up kind of on the radar. If you saw the county budget completely eliminated all community grant funding to 501c3s. It's about $2 million in the 25 budget, and they zeroed it out. The city's budget maintains the same level of community agency funding in 26 that we had in 25, but there were $3 million worth of requests above that level just for local money, not even for federal money, federal pass-through money. And so wanted to make city council and the public aware, we have maintained the level of community agency funding, but our level of funding is about a quarter of what gets requested. Just real quickly on the enterprise side, I want to talk about transit. So this is what the transit budget looks like, budget to budget. You can see at that operating subtotal line about halfway down in the table, there's a $1.4 million increase. Most of that is related to the contractor who is doing the work. There's inflation in the contract. We will be under the contractor for 12 months instead of 11 months this year. So there's a little differential for that, particularly on the TransAid side. Again, that capital line, you see a growth of $1.5 million. 80% of that is covered by federal resources, but that is an increase in the number of buses that we are replacing year to year. And so there's not a huge budget to budget increase in the transit fund. That 2.2 cents, again, will generate more than $8 million in revenue. And there's, to this extent, a $3 million increase, of which, like I said, 80% of that capital increase is covered by federal resources. The point there that I was driving home earlier and with council again is the vast majority of the property tax increase for transit is as a result of the needs that have been in the transit fund for years, where we have been using one-time resources. It's not that the transit fund budget is just growing out of control in fiscal year 26. We've been talking about this for years, and we finally gotten to the point where we need to infuse money back into the fund. So this is what the Transit Authority cash fund or a cash flow looked like last year, where we had money and we intended to spend a lot of fund balance in 25 and then go negative in 26 and even further in 27, spending $6 million or more in reserves. This is what it looks like with that 2.2 cents. The note that I made to city council is when you look at that, like even $2.3 million 4 year or 3 years out, $2.4 million is not even 1 month's operating cash in that fund, right? It's a $30 million fund. So we are recommending a tax rate that keeps us just barely above $0. It is not enough to make significant capital investments, and it's not enough to cash flow if there was an issue with the service. What you will essentially have is, if something happens, you would have to have some type of general fund support in the short term before making a different policy decision on the back end. Did want to talk about off-street parking. So there's a lot out there in the journal and news media about parking in general downtown. What does that look like, both from a parking fund and an on-street parking perspective? So from an accounting perspective, this actually exists in a couple of different funds. The table you have here, the design, is what does the total parking program look like? And these are net costs. So what I would draw your attention to is the bottom line there. The parking program in general was about an $830,000 net program in the 25 budget, and just over 200,000 with all of those changes in 26. So again, about a 75% decrease in the net cost of the parking program, with the changes in the rates and fines and what they're doing with on-street parking and off-street parking with the new pay-by-phone app. Happy to answer any questions there, but at a high level, we had talked about kind of the parking subsidy going down. And so the total parking subsidy for the parking fund and on-street parking goes down about $600,000 year to year. There are a couple of other, again, for those who may be watching this outside of CBAC, if you want to see the full presentations, please go and watch them. They're on the city's YouTube page. CBAC, I encourage you to do so. Again, I may put you to sleep with hours and hours of budget minutia, but that is kind of the budget at a high level. The second thing on our agenda is to discuss and potentially approve the CBAC report with the recommendations specific to those things we've talked about with revenues and debt usage. But I do want to stop and say, if there is anything in this that has caught your attention where you think you would like to provide an additional recommendation to the city council, it is absolutely appropriate to do that. Again, the property tax rate being 4.8 cents above revenue neutral is one thing that we've had a lot of questions about. And also, again, that kind of how does that affect an average residential property tax bill? I think this group has had a lot of discussion and a lot of information on why that's happening. But if you had a recommendation that said that that is too low, too high, if you wanted to make some kind of general recommendation to city council, it would be appropriate to have that conversation. And as we're talking about the report in its current format, if you wanted to add something, you could. So this is the part where I be quiet and I will, Tony, if you have something you want to say or anyone else want to recognize anybody else, this is the time to kind of chime in and have that discussion. Any general thoughts? Jamesina, did you come off mute?
Yes. I'm gonna turn my video on too. I just I just wanted to, I don't know that there's really anything that we can effectively do to change this, but I will say that I've heard from a lot of citizens, the elderly especially, and some of church members that, have just kind of asked, and I've been able to explain what the tax increase, what it means, what it could look like for the average citizen, and even a little bit of why it might need to, or why it looks so dramatic, this year as opposed to maybe what they've seen in previous years. However, I just, people are really struggling. And I just don't know. Looking at our plan makes perfect sense from a budget and financial standpoint. And we have vetted it and we have looked at it. But there are so many people who really are wondering how they're going to be able to afford to pay these taxes on their house. Is there anything in place for citizens like this? Is there any place that citizens can, I've been asked this question, can go to get assistance? Or is there any sort of a place to go to get some more time or any resources that we can point people to that are going to see their tax bill in September and need to get that paid? Maybe it's not worked into their mortgage. Different mortgages are different. But people that just have to pay theirs flat out, maybe they own their home or whatever, it's not worked into the mortgage for whatever reason. Is there a place for citizens? Is there any resources we can point them to where they can ask more specific questions about their own tax bill, and if they have or need resources or other information about what they can do? Is there anything that we can maybe put out there?
So we can put some things out there. The answer to that question is to call the county tax office
Yeah,
directly.
I always do say that.
Yeah, for specific certain populations, there are a few resources.
Okay.
For elderly populations that fall into different income brackets, there are abilities to and this is where if John Burgess were here like he was
I
15
know.
minutes ago, he would answer this question and nail it for you. But there are some opportunities to either reduce or defer the tax bill
Yeah.
for some of those populations, but calling the county tax office directly is the best way to get that information. We could put something on the city's website, and I could talk to the city management team and our marketing folks about putting something out there. Hey, call the county tax office, ask specifically about these. So we could
Yeah.
definitely do that.
I think for some of them, because I always give that response, of course, but some of them are not sure what to say when they call. Some of our elderly neighbors, they're not sure exactly how to word what they're asking about, and so I was hoping that I looked at the website, And there are a few clicks to get to this place. So I'm hoping that maybe we can pull something forward on the website that our elderly neighbors don't have to kind of search, because they struggle sometimes with getting to exactly what page they need. Like they'll go to the website and then they hit the tax button and then they're like, I still don't see where I find the resources for people like me. And I'm like, well, you have to click on, so just some little things like that maybe. And I'm saying that because I don't know how many of other members of the committee people know that you're on this committee, and they may ask you, what can you tell me? Where can you point me? Or whatever. And I like to just be prepared with some specific guidance details. Even though I can't change that for you, but I can say, well, we have now pulled this on the front page of the website. And if you go here, you can see the phone number. You don't have to make 5 or 6 clicks. Or, there's a link right here that we pulled out for citizens who specifically need to ask about what they can do to help them with this tax increase. Not just like tax questions, because that's a little bit different too. When you go to tax questions, general FAQ, it's a little, it doesn't really address, like, I don't have a question about taxes in general, but I want to understand what I can do if I can't afford this tax bill that I'm going to see in September. So that's just my little 2 cents.
So I would say two things to that. One, everyone who is a city resident is also a county resident. So feel free to call over to the county tax office and say, hey, can you guys make this a little easier? From my perspective, when I can send some things over to John and his staff, but the keywords or buzzwords that people are probably looking for are exemptions, exclusions, deferrals, and payment plans. And so I don't know how some of those work, to be perfectly honest. Or the details of all of them. But yeah, you're not looking for what is the tax base, what that kind of stuff. You're looking for very specifically kind of what are my options in terms of reducing my bill or paying it over time, kind of thing. So
Yeah, I think we should expect, given that anytime there's a property tax increase, especially a substantial one, that there's going to be a ton of questions. I would just say that if we were to add anything to James's point, to the recommendations, it would be to be a little bit more proactive in providing resources, given that we should kind of expect an influx of questions. And right, maybe it's as simple as bringing it forward on the website, right? Minor but big difference there. But yeah, highlighting that, given that we should expect people to have questions, is not a bad idea at all.
So I'll stop and say, is that something that you want as an official recommendation in the report, is for basically staff on our side of the website to make something front facing that links to the county, and then also to have conversations with the county about how we can get information out jointly about resources for people who are experiencing some sort of additional need in terms of paying property taxes and meeting their general budget from inflation and those perspectives. How do we link them to the appropriate resources?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, I'm getting a lot of head shaking there. So I will say this is intended to be our last meeting. When we get to the actual approval of the report, I think what we'll be doing is approving it respective to the edits and changes that you are giving us now. So Janice and I will do our absolute best to make sure that we get that language, but it would say something to the effect of what I just said, ensuring that we have forward-facing resources and are having conversations with the county so that those resources are prominently displayed and marketed throughout the community to those that are in need. Okay. Anything else on the budget? And I will say this to the CBAC, we do have some new members. I mean, it is not beyond your purview to say 4.8 cents above revenue neutral is too much. We can't afford this. So we recommend that you find a way to reduce the proposed tax rate. It is not outside your purview to make that recommendation to City Council. So I don't want you to think that you are hamstrung by having to do exactly what the manager has proposed. But also, again, you have a lot more insight and understanding as to where some of that comes from.
Yeah.
So
with some of the accounting changes, one of the things that popped out to me was the convention center piece, right? Recognize that those are accounting changes, but I think what was the biggest one was the operation at an annual loss. So like, obviously, we know that downtown real estate is probably in a differential place than it was 4, 5, 6 years ago. So is there any sort of long-term strategic plan for the center, or where we are at a point where the annual loss represents an opportunity to divest the city from that structure? Or is that something that we want to recommend for future years?
So I'll answer that a couple of ways. One, generally speaking, convention centers and coliseums, wherever they are, lose money. If you were to go to the city of Greensboro's budget, you would see a multi-million-dollar transfer from their general fund to their coliseum fund, which covers the Coliseum, White Oak Amphitheater, Tanger Center, those types of things. So generally speaking, those kinds of assets are expected to have a public benefit, and as a result of that, do run at a deficit. We
Okay.
did do a $17 or $18 million upgrade to the convention center several years ago, and they are having right now some of their best years ever in terms of total revenue and net loss. So I do believe last year they actually made a little bit of money, and so they are having pretty good years. That larger, the second way to answer that is the larger issue of having a business type activity that loses money. And should the city council look at how many of those we have and what their losses should be, is definitely something that you could have as a recommendation. So in addition to the convention center, there are other public assembly facilities that run as business type activities that have general fund or property tax subsidies. The fairgrounds, Bowman Gray Stadium are two good examples of that. And some of the maintenance for the downtown ballpark is eventually going to probably come to a taxpayer need at some point. So it would not be it would definitely be within your purview to have a general recommendation that says you should probably look at some of those business type activities, what their revenue generation is compared to both their operating and capital/debt expenses, and look at how much the taxpayer is subsidizing some of those public assembly facilities specifically.
Yeah, so Scott, I mean, I can think about the convention center specifically. I assume the rationale is it brings an incredible amount of business to the hotels, restaurants, bars in downtown. But I do think that actually probably something that should be looked at maybe next year at CPAC or something. You know, what are the different businesses that the city runs, and whether or not the impact on sales tax and property taxes makes sense for the city to run them or not, if they're losing money. I mean, because I get the point is not for them to make money, but for them to enable other people in the city to make money, you know, to boost the economy. But I do think that should be looked at.
So, Fred, I love when you come to the last meeting of every CBAC and suggest something for the work plan for the next year. I do think that is a good idea. There were one or two things that we already had on the list potentially for next year, and that was one of them. So it is something absolutely we can talk about for next year's work plan. I guess the question being there, do you want there to be some kind of formal recommendation as part of this CBAC report, recognizing that several of our public assembly facilities have basically property tax subsidies to them? And I will say as the budget director that they have grown. The fiscal year 25 was the first year that the general fund has subsidized the fairgrounds to the tune of $1 million, and that will continue to grow annually. The Bowman Gray, or part of that is a Bowman Gray Stadium subsidy, which is about we'll just call it in round terms, $300,000. And again, the convention center has had higher and lower subsidies over the years based on its level of renovation and what's going on. But I would look kind of to the group on this one of, do you want a recommendation that says, as part of next year's work plan for the city, we would like for staff and or CBAC to look at some of those subsidies, better understand them, and look at strategies for decreasing the need for taxpayer funding supporting public assembly facilities. Is that something you want to say as a group?
How about if we modify that a little and just say that we recommend that there be a study by staff and or CBAC, not prejudging what the outcome of the study would be?
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah, so the broader economic effects from those investments.
Okay.
It's based on assumptions from when these facilities were first developed. So for something like Bowman Gray's 80 years ago, right? Like the public investment there is based on assumptions that might be dated based on our current sort of climate. But I think it's a good thing. But Fred, I like your modification of language. I think that's a very key point, not to decide the outcome, but just something to look at and validate.
Janice and I will review this video and make sure that we get that language directly from Fred and have that short recommendation. Again, you will be approving, hopefully, the report here contingent upon both of those two ads, both one about resources and communication thereof, and then kind of studying public assembly facility / enterprise funds, and particularly for public assembly facility funds, their effect on the local economy, respective to what we, I think in some of those cases, when we say what it was, I mean, Bowman Gray Stadium, I think, was built 60 or 80 years ago. Obviously a different local economy then than now, but we will make sure we get that language in there. Anything else that we would like to see in that report? If not, Tony, I would ask that you kind of call the question on approving the report subject to the two changes that you have made today.
Yeah, motion to approve the annual CBAC report, plus a couple of minor changes that we discussed on the video, that presumably Scott, Janice will send out once those changes are made.
Yes, very quickly we will.
All right, so that's the motion.
A second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 That appears unanimous.
Right.
All right, well, we thank you for that. I do believe also on the agenda, we have approval of minutes, both for the last meeting that took place on May 14th, and then also for the April meeting, because I incorrectly counted the number of people that were in the last meeting and thought we didn't have a quorum when we did. That's my fault. Tony, if you want to call for the minutes for the April meeting to be approved, we could get a motion in a second for that.
Yeah, motion to approve the April meeting minutes.
I make a motion.
All right, got a second motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That
All-
appears unanimous.
Yeah.
And then the
good.
same thing for the May 14th minutes, which Janice sent out with the last or the last email.
All right, making motion to approve was that technically the May
May
minute?
May
May
14th, yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve those May 14th minutes.
Right. Want a second?
Second.
Okay.
All right. All in favor, hand or aye or both?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Looks like we're unanimous there as well.
All right. Well, the one thing remaining, Tony, is for you to come to City Council and provide a presentation of this report. I believe the intent right now is there is a committee of the whole meeting on June the 9th, which would be the week before adoption. I will speak with the city manager about that, but if you will check your availability on that Monday at 2 o'clock, there would be another opportunity the Monday before that in the evening, if you were not available, at a full city council meeting that I could talk to the city manager about. But Janice and I will get with you about that. We will, again, make these changes to the draft report, finalize it, get it out to the entire CBAC. Tony, we will create the presentation and the annotated speakers notes for it, send that to you in advance. We'll work with you on the timing, but I think the intent is to try and get you to council on June the 9th. If that doesn't work for your schedule, we'll find a backup date. And if you can't do it, James Messina would be, as vice chair, on the hook there if neither one of those dates works for you.
Yeah, off the bat, that 2 o'clock on Monday, the 9th should be fine. So
Okay.
Hmm.
All right. Well, having said that, I'd like to say thank you to the CBAC for listening to me talk on and on about revenues and reval and expenses and all of those things this year. The twofold intent of CBAC is always to learn more about the city's budget, so that you can go out and help educate those around you, and then also to look at specific policy issues. And so you did spend a lot of time looking kind of at our debt structuring for at least the way that we use 2/3 bonds for maintenance and that kind of internal leasing program. So thank you again for your time this year. We do have Fred kind of teased an idea for next year as a work plan item. There were one or two other things that the manager and I had already started to talk about. But we may reach out in advance of next year and say, here are a couple of options and see which ones the CBAC likes, or if the manager is very specific on one, may want you to look at that. But I just want to say thank you for your time over the course of the last 6 months. Thank you for being adjustable and flexible with us when the cyber event happened. We really appreciate you letting us move the schedule around and do greatly appreciate your time with respect to this report this year.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Scott, on behalf of the group, thank you for all the time that you put into this, obviously, and putting together a report. Janice as well, and the rest of the team. And I think the uptick in organizing some of the speakers come in from the outside, and even the visits when we've had those opportunities are huge. And I know they take a lot of logistical work, but I think they've been a great help to us to be able to experience some of the some of the material hands-on. So many thanks from us as well.
All righty. Well, that is all we have for you. If you want to call for an official adjournment of the meeting, that will be the last adjournment of this CBAC group this year.
All right. Well, I move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. All in favor of adjourning today till our next session. All right. All right. Looks like we're good to go. I will hear from y'all soon. We'll look forward to an email with those changes.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you
Thanks.
much.